All right, so you're listening because you like to get into the nitty-gritty, and you want to do it quickly, right? Well, we're going to jump right into something that's a pretty big deal in how wars are being fought these days.
Yeah, we're talking AI, specifically how it's being used in targeting, particularly in the Gaza Strip.
And we've been digging deep into a bunch of reports and expert analyses, really trying to break down how AI is changing the game on the battlefield.
The idea for this deep dive is to really get a handle on what AI-assisted targeting even means. What are the big implications? And frankly, what are the different ways people are thinking about this whole thing?
And we want to do that without throwing around a bunch of super technical terms that make your head spin.
Right, exactly.
We're really going to be zeroing in on two specific AI systems that we keep seeing pop up in these reports, the Gospel and Lavender.
Both reportedly being used by the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces.
Now, it's important to understand the context here. The reports we've seen point to a huge increase in bombing operations that the IDF is carrying out in Gaza. And AI is suspected to be a major factor in how fast they can now identify these potential targets.
Yeah, the speed is a big part of this.
So let's unpack this a bit, starting with the Gospel. What we've gathered is that it's an AI system designed to essentially automatically comb through, mountains of surveillance data.
That's it, in a nutshell. It's sifting through all this information, buildings, equipment, people, and trying to flag anything or anyone it thinks could be connected to an enemy organization. Then it puts those potential targets forward to a human analyst for review.
So the human is still in the loop.
Yeah.
They're the ones deciding whether to actually greenlight a strike based on what the AI is suggesting.
That's right, there's a human check in there.
Okay, so we've got the Gospel. Then there's this other system called Lavender. It's been described as an AI-powered database. And this one seems to be more about individuals. The reports we've seen say that it's got this list, and it's tens of thousands of Palestinian men long, all linked by the AI to either Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
You got it. And just like the Gospel, Lavender is also apparently being used to generate target recommendations. The whole idea behind using AI in this way, from what they're saying, is to make the targeting process super fast and automated.
It's a big change.
Yeah.
We've heard that in previous conflicts in Gaza, the Israeli Air Force actually ran out of targets at one point. Like, they felt they'd hit everything they could.
Wow. Okay, that's quite a contrast.
Yeah, it's a totally different ballgame now. It's important to remember, though, right, these AI systems, despite these kind of, powerful names they've got,
Yeah.
they're not conscious beings. They don't think or reason like a person does.
Right. No, they're sophisticated, but it's all about data and patterns.
So how does something like the Gospel actually work? We know it uses machine learning, but can you break that down for us? What's going on under the hood?
Okay, so imagine you're feeding the system huge, and I mean huge amounts of data. Think. Surveillance footage of people that human analysts have already tagged as, say, members of Hamas.
Got it.
The AI looks for patterns in that data, recurring similarities, things that pop up again and again.
So, like certain behaviors, maybe places these individuals tend to hang out, who they're interacting with, things that are statistically more likely to point to them being part of an enemy group.
You're getting it. It's all about the stats. Once the Gospel has been trained on that initial data, then it starts processing new information as it comes in. It's looking for those same patterns it learned before. And if it finds enough similarities to what it was trained on, it flags it.
It says, hey, this new building, this piece of equipment, this person.
This could be a match.
Right. And it recommends that for a closer look as a potential target.
Yep.
And while we don't know exactly what information it's using, it seems like it could be pulling from a lot of different sources.
Yeah.
Everything from drone footage to intercepted communications, you name it.
As far as we know, yeah. So those recommendations it makes, they're all based on this pattern matching. It's about the probability. If something or someone is ticking enough of the same boxes as known enemy elements from the training data, it could be flagged as a potential target.
And this ability to churn out potential targets so quickly, it looks like it's really led to a massive increase in the scale of these military operations.
The numbers in some of these reports are, frankly, pretty shocking.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around. Retired Lieutenant General Aviv Kohavi talked about how a system like this could produce, are you ready for this, up to 100 bombing targets per day in Gaza.
Per day.
And he estimated that human analysts in the past were looking at something like 50 targets a year.
That's a huge difference. It really highlights the sheer speed that AI brings to the table.
It's night and day. There was another estimate that really stuck with me. It said that in the past, 20 intelligence officers working for 300 days might identify somewhere between 50 and 100 targets. The gospel, on the other hand, could reportedly generate 200 targets in something like 10 to 12 days.
It's just incredible how much faster it is. And by early November, the IDF was reporting that more than 12,000 targets in Gaza had been identified using the gospel. That's a huge number.
And the rate of the bombing itself has apparently gone way up, too. Since October 7th, they've hit over 22,000 targets inside Gaza.
Wow.
And the daily rate of strikes is reportedly more than double what it was during the 2021 conflict. There's also this other AI system that keeps coming up called Fire Factory.
Oh, yeah, Fire Factory.
What's its role in all this?
Yeah. So as far as we can tell, Fire Factory comes into play after a target has already been approved. It's about putting together the actual plan of attack. And the reports say it can do this in minutes. It figures out the types and amounts of munitions they need, which targets to hit first, which aircraft or drones to use, even suggest a timeline for the whole thing.
So AI isn't just speeding up the identification of targets, it's streamlining the entire process of actually carrying out the attack as well.
That's right.
And it seems like this whole increase in capability, this new speed, has led to some pretty significant changes in how they're approaching targeting in general.
Yeah, you can really see a shift. It seems like AI systems, especially the gospel, have made it possible for the IDF to target a much wider range of individuals, specifically lower-ranking operatives within groups like Hamas. Part of this is because the higher-ups, they often head straight into those underground tunnels when a conflict starts.
Right, makes sense.
And what we're hearing is that before, the homes of these lower-level members, they weren't typically considered targets.
It was like, they're not high value enough.
Yeah, something like that. But now it seems almost anyone suspected of being a Hamas operative, regardless of how high up they are, could be a target.
We actually saw a quote from someone who was involved in targeting decisions in previous Gaza conflicts, and they basically said that now they're going after pretty much anyone they suspect.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, it's a big change. Yuval Abraham, who writes for Plus 972 magazine, described this as a systematization of dropping a 2,000-pound bomb on a house to kill one person and everyone else who's with them.
Yeah, I read that piece. It's pretty stark.
Yeah. Plus 972 magazine and Local Call have even suggested that basically the system is being used to manufacture targets. They're saying it's a way to keep the bombardment going and to punish the entire Palestinian population. But, and it's an important but, we haven't seen any independent confirmation of that interpretation.
Right.
But regardless of what the intentions are, the speed and sheer volume of the bombing is being described as astonishing. And, of course, the civilian casualties have been really high.
Yeah, the human toll is a huge concern. And there was that quote from early in the offensive where the head of the Air Force actually said, "We are not being surgical."
Yeah, that was pretty blunt. And, the IDF often says that AI allows for more precise attacks with the goal of minimizing harm to non-combatants. But there are some pretty strong counterarguments out there.
For sure. A lot of experts are raising serious concerns.
Richard Moyes, who's with Article 36, pointed to the widespread flattening of an urban area as evidence that those strikes aren't as precise as they're claiming. And then you've got Lucy Suchman, who said the bombing was aimed at maximum devastation of the Gaza Strip. Those are pretty serious accusations.
They are. And Heidi Kloff, who's from Trail of Bits, reminds us that AI algorithms, by their very nature, have error rates. And how well they work depends entirely on the data they're trained on, the quality, the biases that might be baked in.
Right. The AI is only as good as the information it's given.
Exactly. Bianca Baggiarini at ANU added that AI generally works best in predictable situations. And trying to differentiate between combatants and civilians in a complex conflict zone, that's about as unpredictable as it gets.
Yeah, not exactly ideal conditions for an AI to be making life or death calls.
Right.
We also learned about something called collateral damage scores that are reportedly assigned to potential targets. Basically, they're trying to estimate how many civilian deaths a given strike might cause.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to quantify the human cost.
And there are even reports that they're using algorithms to estimate how many civilians might still be in a building before they hit it. Apparently, they've got a color-coded system, green, yellow, red, to indicate the level of risk to civilians, like a traffic light.
It's a really, chilling way to think about it.
Now, the IDF does say that human analysts review the targets that the AI recommends. But with the sheer volume of targets being generated, it makes you wonder how much time and attention they can really give to each one.
That's the million-dollar question. If you've got a system spitting out potential targets at that rate, it puts enormous pressure on those human analysts.
Right. I mean, how thorough can their review really be? Are they just rubber stamping what the AI is telling them?
That's the worry. Tal even suggested that analysts might just be approving the AI recommendations, to make their own lives easier.
It's like, just keep things moving, keep those bombs dropping.
Exactly. And that raises the question, at what point does human judgment just become a formality, where the AI is really calling the shots, even if it's making mistakes?
And that brings us to the big ethical and legal questions surrounding all of this. The main concerns seem to be about violations of international humanitarian law.
Right. Those core principles, like military necessity, proportionality, and the distinction between combatants and civilians, are those even being considered?
The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has said he's deeply troubled by these reports. And Benzal, who's a UN Special Rapporteur, has even gone so far as to say that if these reports are accurate, a lot of the Israeli strikes could be war crimes.
That's a huge statement.
Yeah. And the fact that AI is now involved in these decisions, it just makes the whole question of accountability even murkier. If the system makes a mistake and civilians are killed, who's to blame? Is the analysts, the developers, the military commanders?
Tough questions, no easy answers.
Now, the IDF has pushed back on these criticisms. They're saying some of these reports are just plain wrong, or that they're based on a misunderstanding of how they operate and the laws they follow. They're saying they only target legitimate military objectives and personnel, and that they stick to the principles of proportionality. They're taking precautions to protect civilians.
Right, that's their side of it.
They describe their system as a tool to help analyze and cross-reference intelligence, not a list of confirmed targets.
More like a guide, in their view.
And they say their analysts are doing thorough, independent reviews to make sure each target is legal under international law. They specifically deny any policy aimed at killing large numbers of people in their homes.
Okay. But then there are these reports about pre-authorized limits on the number of civilian deaths that are considered acceptable when they're targeting suspected Hamas members. And these limits supposedly vary based on the rank of the person. Over 100 civilians for top commanders, maybe as few as 5 for lower-level militants.
Yeah. And experts in international humanitarian law have raised red flags about that. They're saying proportionality should be assessed on a case-by-case basis, not with some preset number.
Right, you can't just have a quota for civilian casualties.
The IDF is saying they do look at each target individually. They assess the military advantage versus the potential harm to civilians, and they don't attack if they think the civilian casualties will be too high. But there's this other report, and this one is particularly disturbing. It's about a program that's supposedly called Where's Daddy?
Where's Daddy?
Yeah. And this program is allegedly tracking suspected militants, waiting for them to go back to their homes, and then bombing them there.
Wow.
So, these reports have obviously triggered a lot of strong reactions internationally. People are calling for stricter rules about how AI is used in war.
Definitely. I mean, the UN Secretary General is worried about the blurring of accountability, who's responsible for what when you've got AI in the mix. And Marco and Jones went even further. He called it an AI-assisted genocide. He's saying we need to put the brakes on all use of AI in warfare.
That's a pretty radical stance.
It is. But, when you look at what's happening, it's not hard to see why people are having such strong reactions. Ben Saul, who we mentioned earlier, his warning about potential war crimes, it really underscores how serious these allegations are.
It's not just some fringe group making these claims. These are respected legal experts.
Right. Ramesh Srinivasan pointed a finger at the big tech companies, too. He suggested that they're complicit in all of this because they helped develop these systems. And the fact that they're being used, even though they could have significant error rates, that's a real problem.
It's like they're putting profit over human life. We also keep hearing about this distinction between fully automated weapons and lethal autonomous weapons, law glove years. Israel's saying that the gospel falls under the category of laws where humans still have control.
But Lord Arusi Rashgandis has said this whole conflict might force us to really nail down what significant human control actually means. Like, where's the line?
It's a really blurry line right now. And, sometimes it's easy to get lost in the technical details and the legal arguments, but it's important to remember the human cost of all this.
Absolutely.
You brought up that bombing in southern Lebanon earlier. Can you remind us what happened there?
So in Bint Jbeil, an Israeli airstrike killed 2 brothers. One of them was actually visiting from Australia with his wife, and she was killed too. Hezbollah said one of the brothers was a fighter, and they included the civilian family members in the funeral. But it's a stark example of how devastating these targeting decisions can be, no matter how sophisticated the technology is.
At the end of the day, it's people who are dying.
Real people with families and lives.
So this deep dive into AI-assisted targeting in the Gaza Strip, I mean, it's complicated, it's rapidly evolving, and it raises some really tough questions.
Yeah, it's hard to overstate how much this is changing the nature of war. On the one hand, you have this potential for increased speed for operations at a scale we've never seen before. But on the other, you've got these massive ethical, legal, and humanitarian concerns. Experts and international organizations are sounding the alarm.
It really makes you think. As AI becomes more integrated into warfare, how do we make sure that humans are still making the decisions, that there's accountability? And what are the long-term consequences for the laws of war, for how we protect civilians? It's something we all need to be thinking about because these technologies, they're not going away.
No, they're only going to become more powerful.
So we really want to leave you with this question. How do we ensure that the human element doesn't get lost in all of this? What can we do to make sure these technologies are used responsibly, ethically, and with respect for human life? Think about it, and let's keep the conversation going.